I've changed the land that was in Emily's name to mine.
Jessica told me that she changed the land in my name that I inherited from my late husband into her own name, without permission. It's true that things hadn't been going well between Jessica and me, but I had never imagined she would go this far. Looking for support, I turned to my eldest son, only to find him looking at me with cold eyes.
Mom, you always bully your daughter-in-law and act like the worst person. If you think you're in the wrong even a bit, just gracefully transfer the into her and show some sincerity by living the rest of your life as a housekeeper.
My son was clearly on his wife's side. To be honest, I didn't intend to bully her. In fact, I felt more like I was the one being bullied. But in the current situation, I didn't think anything I said would be understood. I felt ridiculous even trying to persuade them, so I decided to leave as Jessica had suggested. I emphasized as I said, "So you want me to leave, right?"
You're not crying, acting all tough.
I was cursed at Jessica. But really, you was being tough here. They didn't seem to realize what would happen after I left. My husband and I were both in our late 50s. We had 2 sons, each married and living away from home, which left us living just the 2 of us. We live in the countryside that anyone would imagine. The nearest train station was inconvenient without a car, and although there were buses, they only ran twice an hour during commute times. And not at all on Sundays and holidays. The only store nearby was a liquor store masquerading as a convenience store, located at the heart of our small community. Our eldest son had always despised our local area. He had wanted to attend a more prosperous nearby high school, but ended up begrudgingly going to the local agricultural school. After graduating high school, he left home to live in the city. He married a woman he met while living in his dream city, and continues to live there. The eldest son and his wife have visited a few times for formal introductions since their marriage, but other than that, they hardly ever come by or get in touch. Still, they are family, so sometimes there are essential matters that cannot be ignored. Home affairs were traditionally handled by the wives in our family. Even if we don't usually communicate with each other. That's why when I needed to see Jessica, I would be the one to visit her. Especially since she also hated the countryside. When I visited, she would spray air freshener around me because I smelled of the countryside. At first, it bothered me, but now I just treat it as a trivial matter. Because even though I am out of touch with her, I didn't want to have a bad relationship anymore. Meanwhile, my younger son lived in a rural town. Not much different from where he grew up due to his job. It wasn't too hard for him to travel by car, and he often visited to check on us. His wife was a charming woman with a generous personality, and our relationship with her was very good. Sadly, my husband passed away while we were still in our 50s. Struck by sudden misfortune, I was overwhelmed with grief. He often said that his only wish was for me to live comfortably after he was gone. Even if it meant letting go of our ancestral land and home if they ever became burdens. In other words, he said that once I inherited it, I could do whatever I wanted with it. He had discussed this with our eldest son. Along with his wife, emphatically rejected inheriting the rural land, saying, it would be pointless to inherit land in the countryside when it's not even in an urban area. Consequently, our eldest son preferred something else, and so did our younger son. I later learned from my younger son that he thought it was best for me to inherit the place filled with our family memories. His family had considered moving back to live with me, but it was too much of a burden on his commute, so they reluctantly decided against it. However, they assured me that they would welcome the idea of living together at our family home if circumstances ever made it necessary. I also decided not to let the property tie down our children's lives. When the time comes, I'll make a clean decision. So I ended up with the land and house, while my sons divided the rest of the estate equally between them. After my husband passed away, development in the neighborhood began to pick up, and the value of the land started to increase. I'm in my 60s now, but I still feel fit and content enough to enjoy life in the countryside. While some disliked the development and moved even deeper into the mountains, everyone has their own opinion about it. Personally, if a supermarket were built nearby, I wouldn't need to drive, and it could help avoid family disputes over things like surrendering a driver's license as I get older. Above all, if the development reduces the worries of my considerate younger son and his wife, then it's not all bad. Honestly, I was excited about the prospect of a more convenient life, but I had no idea that Jessica's unexpected actions would soon disturb my peace. As the development progressed, rumors started to spread among the residents about an increase in the number of buses heading to the nearest train station and a new high-rise apartment building nearby. It was around this time that I heard from my eldest son. You had been distant until then.
The job in the city didn't work out, and I ended up quitting. Trying to make a living in the city was just a fleeting dream.
I said to my eldest son, you started saying this and that. Why don't you just clearly say what you mean? I pressed him somewhat sharply for a conclusion. He then said,
I want to move back and live at your home.
So, you want to live with me? I asked for clarification, but he kept repeating his awkwardly phrased request. About a month ago, we had a family gathering for the 3rd year of my husband's death. My son had only complained about how country-like everything was, so I wondered what had changed his mind. In the middle of our conversation, Jessica suddenly interrupted.
Emily, you live in such a wonderful place. If it's going to be modernized with all this development, just tell me so.
The mountain trees had been cleared for a better view. It seems there was also talk of a large shopping mall coming to an area. Jessica, who had never considered the rural land worth her attention, now seemed interested because the development was making the area more livable. The land and house my husband left behind were in a very good location. The mountains behind my house is also the land I inherited from my husband.
There's going to be some land purchases for the development, right? Are you going to sell the mountains at the back?
Apparently, my eldest son and his wife regretted not considering the rural land worth anything before. Now, unable to claim inheritance, they seemed to be cozying up to me, likely wanting a share of the money if I sold the land.
Oh no, Emily, the main issue is not money, but my husband.
Jessica's reply seemed rather theatrical. I listened skeptically, as it felt like I was being subjected to a bad speech. In short, it appears true that my son lost his job and became unemployed, with his savings nearly running out even to cover next month's rent. When I asked what happened to the inheritance he shared with his brother, he seemed reluctant to touch it. Jessica, although struggling, wants to consider carefully how to use the money left by my husband since we just finished the 3rd year of his death. I thought to myself, if you're struggling, just use the money. But I held back from saying it out loud, as it would likely be met with accusations of being cold-hearted. Jessica pleaded desperately in tears, telling me that she couldn't afford gas and electricity if she paid rent.
Please let us live with you.
You want to live in the countryside. Can you really handle it after insisting on city life for so long? I asked him if he was considering finding a job in the countryside instead of the city. Wouldn't it be better for you to find a job back in the city? I could hardly believe that my eldest son, who had moved to the city, would now accept the country life.
I can change the inevitable. It might soon become difficult even to afford food, so I need your help.
Until the end, he didn't specify whether he'd seek re-employment in the city or the countryside. So, I set conditions. Living together would be temporary until he found a job. Additionally, he must try to find some work, even part-time, while living together. With the ongoing development in the area, there were plenty of short-term job opportunities available. If he wasn't too picky, he should be able to get hired. I figured if I took care of him and his wife for about half a year, they could save up some money and possibly make a fresh start. Marriage is about helping each other. Naturally, I thought Jessica would work outside the home, even not daily, to help gather funds for a fresh start. However, once we started living together, my plans fell apart completely. My eldest son was as committed as he had promised, spending his days job hunting. He searched for jobs during the day and spent several hours in the evening guarding construction sites. At first, Jessica acted supportive, but as my son began to be away for long hours due to job hunting and part-time work, she suddenly changed her attitude.
No way. I can't stand it. It's embarrassing for me to go shopping in a mini truck.
Shopping had become a weekly routine because a mini truck was more convenient than the stylish cars you see in the city. It was Jessica who had initially said she would handle the shopping. However, after going once, she refused to do it again, claiming she was embarrassed by the mini truck. Jessica would say in front of my son that she liked my cooking and wanted to learn, but when he was not around, she would say the opposite. "I can't stand this country-style cooking, and I want French food," she would complain. She would say things like Mom's cooking is so annoying, and skip her turn to cook. One day, when Jessica said she would make dinner, I believed her and went to maintain the woods behind our house. Regular maintenance and selective logging are necessary to prevent overgrowth. Especially important at the change of the seasons and for dealing with fallen leaves. Since my husband's death, I had been hiring young people from our community to help, but I occasionally went to check on things myself. After finishing the work of the backwoods, I returned home exhausted in the evening, only to find the house dark and locked, unable to get inside. I couldn't reach Jessica on her phone, and was at a loss when my eldest son returned home. Then Jessica came home, and I confronted her about where she had been after locking the house.
That's terrible, Emily. I did go shopping just as you asked. How could you forget that?
Furthermore, she explained to my son that I had been insisting on having an impossible-to-make dish and had said if she couldn't make that dish tonight, she should leave. I hadn't said any such thing, nor was I even aware that she had left the house. Yet, my son took Jessica's side.
Just because we're living together reluctantly doesn't mean you can bully your daughter-in-law. Jessica isn't used to country life. It's impossible to get ingredients for fancy dishes out here in the countryside.
He accused me of intentionally sending Jessica to do something unachievable. Although we had clashed over differing values before, being unfairly criticized like this was new to me. It was sad to see my son, who was right in front of me, feeling like a stranger. Shouldn't a son support his mom? I wouldn't go that far. In the world, husbands often side with their wives for a better marital relationship, and indeed, my deceased husband had always supported me. But he had always listened to both sides, and that had helped maintain a good relationship with his mother while she was alive. To think that he would just take his wife's side and yell at me like this. My son angrily continued.
Eat that fancy dish you made up all by yourself. I'm going out to eat with Jessica.
He snatched the keys from Jessica, threw them at me, and headed back the way he came. When I entered the house, it was just as I had left it in the morning. Jessica hadn't done any housework at all. I was so frustrated that I couldn't stop crying. But there was so much to do that even wiping away the tears seemed a waste. I tidied up the house while crying. A few days later, the owner of the diner where my eldest son had gone out to eat came to visit me, asking if everything was all right with us living together. There's only one diner around here, and it's the same place where we used to eat as a family when my kids were little. It's run by a childhood friend of my husband, and my son knows well that it was his father's favorite spot. Apparently, at his diner, my son and Jessica had been speaking ill of me. It seemed that Jessica had been feeding my son a distorted view of things. I didn't go into detail, but thanked the owner for letting me know. He told me to rely on him if I needed anything, and didn't pry further. Seeing that my eldest son took his wife's side of the story, he said sadly, "I wonder if people change when they go to the city." After this incident, I decided not to expect anything from Jessica. If efforts to get along don't communicate, then they're just a waste of time. I'm better off quickly doing the housework myself with that time and effort. If I thought about retaliating, I wouldn't be any different from Jessica. As usual, I prepared meals for 3 and did the laundry for 3, no matter what Jessica did. Whether Jessica took it for granted or thought she was lucky that I was doing all the chores, she continued to behave like a guest who never leaves. Then, one day, Jessica said something unbelievable.
I'm in the process of changing the land and house, which are in Emily's name, into my name.
She claimed to have all the documents ready and flaunted them in front of me. However, she didn't show them clearly enough for me to see properly, which made me suspicious of her claims. Having seen the necessary documents for title transfer from my husband to myself many times before, the papers she held looked like poor forgeries. I asked her, "Are those documents real?"
Of course they are.
She snapped back.
From now on, I'll be the head of this household. If you don't want to be thrown out, you better show some remorse for your bullying and apologize. How about you continue to serve as my personal maid? If not, you're free to leave.
She seemed quite confident that the documents were legitimate. I confronted my eldest son. If you can't keep the promise to live together, shouldn't you be the one to leave? I challenged him with logic. However, my eldest son accused me of being the first to break our agreement.
It's shameful to be raised by such a terrible mom who bullies her daughter-in-law. If you feel bad, Mom should hand everything over to me and retire. Just because we clash doesn't mean you should take it out on my wife. How can you not be embarrassed as an older woman behaving like this?
Jessica had convinced him that I was harsh on her because I hated my son. Jessica, who had heard from my son about our disagreements, must have used that information to her advantage. Given that my relationship with my eldest son was already strained, it was easy for her to worsen it further. I realized that no matter what I said, he would not believe me. I felt it was a waste of effort to persuade him further, and suddenly remembered my husband's words. "All right, I'll accept all your terms. However, I need a week to prepare." Jessica was reluctant, but my son agreed. I needed a week to sort out my belongings, find a new place, and handle other necessary arrangements. A week later, I left the house. As I was leaving, Jessica taunted me with a triumphant look.
It's time to get out.
But I left silently, making a victorious gesture in my mind. This was the start of my counterattack. I looked forward to what would happen in a month. As expected, a month later, Jessica contacted me in a frenzy. She had tried to sell the land for cash, but was told it was already in the process of being subdivided and couldn't be sold.
What have you done?
She screamed, her tirade unbearable like a machine gun. In fact, there had been discussions about selling the backwoods and land as a set as the local development was progressing. The condition was that it had to be sold as a set. Since managing the backwoods by myself was challenging, I appreciate the offer. However, I still had feelings for the house I had lived in with my husband, and asked to hold off on the set sale. During this time, issues with the house's aging came up. A relative who worked in construction mentioned during my husband's monthly memorial that it was concerning since the house had been in the family since my great-grandparents' time. The house felt vast now that I was alone, although it hadn't seemed so large when 3 generations lived there. I felt a bit lonely being left behind in such a big house. Even if rebuilt, my sons wouldn't live in it. After a while, I think it might be a good idea to sell. The company that wanted to buy the mountains and land said the area's development would take years, so there was no rush. However, living with my son and his wife had gradually altered my plans, and I decided to sell them. The company that approached me about demolishing the house and clearing the land offered to cover the costs, which was a welcome proposal. I just couldn't stand the idea of Jessica unlawfully claiming my husband's land with a fake contract. I did not want to hand it over to Jessica, who believed the contract was real, or to my eldest son, who followed his wife without question. I informed my younger son of the situation and my decision. Although he felt sad about the loss of our family home, he reminded me that memories reside in the heart, not in physical objects. Furthermore, he and his wife had invited me to live with them. I think they have some concerns about leaving the familiar areas, but this is also quite rural, so they would like it. Moved by the kindness of my younger son and his wife, I am now living with them. I ignored Jessica's yelling, ending the call and blocking her number when appropriate. Later, my eldest son, having asked around the relatives about my whereabouts, came to my younger son's house. He cried to me for help, and he started explaining everything that had happened since I was driven out. Initiated by Jessica's friend introducing a legal consultant. Jessica trusted her friend completely, and thus, she believed everything the legal consultant said without a doubt. Jessica was told she could change the land and house from my name to hers with small reward, which was less than half the usual fee. Thinking she would make a fortune later, she rashly proceeded with these plans using the inheritance to cover any shortfall. On the promised day, her friend and the legal consultant prepared the transfer documents and gave them to Jessica, who, without suspicion, believed them to be genuine and handed over the reward. After all the preliminary arrangements were completed, Jessica explained everything rapidly to my eldest son when he returned from his part-time job. Being tired, he didn't think much about it and believed that his wife was telling him, so there was no doubt. It doesn't make sense for Jessica to become the owner of the family home while my son is still alive.
I think it's better for Emily if I own it. As housewives protecting the same home, we can surely have an open discussion.
She convinced him, and he naively agreed. While he was out job hunting and working, Jessica meticulously planned my eviction and brainwashed my son into thinking it was all my fault, ultimately succeeding in kicking me out. However, when she triumphantly went to sell the house and land, she was told it was impossible because it was being subdivided. Panicking, Jessica tried contacting her friend and the legal consultant, but they were unreachable. Eventually, their phone lines were disconnected, and when she reached out to her friend's parents, they rebuffed her, stating they had disowned a criminal. It was then that Jessica discovered her friend had been a repeat fraudster and a convicted criminal. She later found out that many of her classmates had been victims of her friend, who introduced them to fake lawyers, accountants, and legal consultants, exploiting them for fees. Some victims had filed police reports, while others resigned themselves to considering it a costly lesson. These individuals could say so because they still had their homes. My son and Jessica had not only been scammed but also lost their home and the inheritance before they could even consider filing a police report. Figuring out their immediate situation was the priority. Since the inheritance money should have been largely untouched, I suggested, "Why don't you rent an apartment?" Only then he revealed that the cash card for the account holding the inheritance had been switched out and replaced with another. By the time he noticed, all the money had been withdrawn. "Help me, I'm completely broke," my son pleaded, kneeling before me. It seems that extra charges had been incurred due to complications in preparing the fake documents, and Jessica had withdrawn the money accompanied by her friend, who likely spied on her PIN. Swapping the card would have been easy for a professional without her noticing. Driven by greed and lacking vigilance, Jessica had openly discussed the inheritance money with her friend, making herself an easy target. There had been warnings circulated by Jessica's school about alumni committing fraud against classmates and juniors, advising to be wary of contacts and offers from people with whom they did not usually communicate. However, Jessica dismissed these warnings, claiming, "Only fools get scammed." I pushed my eldest son and wife away, saying that it was their own fault. Even without the inheritance, my son should have had some savings from his part-time job. However,
That measly part-time pay, it's gone on booze, obviously.
he admitted that he had spent all his earnings on drinking with his friends. "It's your own fault for not planning." I turned him away once again. When my eldest son became too insistent, my younger son's wife returned home, wearing her martial arts uniform over her shoulder, exuding a formidable presence that made him feel threatened, and he quickly left. My daughter-in-law has recently taken up self-defense as a hobby. She happened to arrive home just as my eldest son was overstaying his welcome, and he got scared and ran off on his own. I told her, "Your timing was perfect. I'm so grateful." Later, my eldest son and his wife, who had to work at the diner where my husband's childhood friend owned, kept complaining about the low hourly wage compared to the urban area, and they got kicked out.
Don't they know how to be grateful to others?
From then on, no one was willing to help them. One day, a new house was built on the land where our family once lived. Seeing this, Jessica lost her sanity and invaded someone else's home.
This is my land and house. It was supposed to be mine.
She occupied the place, leading to her arrest by the police for trespassing. When the police contacted me to take responsibility for her, I refused. Then Jessica started a silent protest, refusing to speak unless I came. The police asked for my help to persuade her, but I refused as well. When asked if I would help because my son requested it, I responded, "I have no obligation to help, so please just lock her up." When arrested, Jessica claimed she had been scammed. It seems her story was believed because there were other similar reports, but that didn't erase her crimes. Not only was she thoroughly exploited, but the friend and the fake legal consultant who committed the fraud are still at large. Even if caught, I was told the stolen money wouldn't be returned, used without permission. The inheritance money and the experience seemed to have finally opened my son's eyes. My son and Jessica ended up divorcing, and each started their own difficult path, but my son was struggling to find steady work. Jessica, having had enough of the countryside, returned to the city, and was last seen working in a rundown bar before she suddenly disappeared. Apparently after accumulating a significant amount of debt. I officially moved in with my younger son and his wife. Initially, the cohabitation was meant to be a trial period when the issues with my eldest son's family arose. I didn't want to be a burden to my daughter-in-law. However, living together turned out to be harmonious, and we got along very well, mainly because we could speak freely without tension or intimidation. Most importantly, we shared similar tastes in food and enjoyed exchanging recipes, making every day enjoyable. The efforts to care for each other never felt forced. Many neighbors even thought my daughter-in-law and I were actually mother and daughter because our relationship was so good. Just as my husband had hoped, I am enjoying the rest of my life with my younger son and his family. I look forward to sharing these stories at my husband's grave.